What if the exact strategies that make you so successful in your career, right?
Mm.
Like efficiency, speed, highly technical precision. What if those are the very things completely sabotaging your personal life?
Oh, it's a massive paradigm shift when you really stop and look at it.
I mean, think about it. For those of you listening, we live in a world where we optimize literally everything. We biohack our diets, we speed read our emails. We want the absolute most direct route to the destination.
Yeah, we're completely trained to love a quick fix.
Exactly. But when you take that mechanical, highly optimized mindset and apply it to physical intimacy, the entire system just breaks down.
It actively works against our biology in this context.
Right. We're looking at a landscape of human connection today that is honestly entirely misunderstood,
Yeah.
mostly because we treat it like a machine that needs fixing rather than, an experience that needs building.
Well, the biological reality is that intimacy is not a puzzle to be solved as fast as possible. What works for everyday cognitive tasks is actually detrimental here.
Which is exactly why our mission for today's deep dive is to completely dismantle that conventional wisdom. For you listening, whether you are trying to understand your own biology on a deeper level, or maybe you just want to be a far more attuned partner, we are unpacking a stack of sources on the physiological and psychological realities of physical intimacy.
We really need to separate the cultural myths from the biological facts.
Totally. And the biggest myth of all, the one we are tackling first, is the idea that the secret to satisfaction is reaching a specific destination as quickly as possible.
Right. The irony is that treating intimacy like a race to the finish line is precisely why so many people report feeling so unfulfilled.
Even when everything supposedly works correctly on paper.
Exactly. When you analyze the data around satisfaction, you really have to throw out the idea of just measuring the peak of the experience.
So how should we look at it?
Well, you need to visualize a graph. On the vertical axis, you have the intensity of pleasure, and on the horizontal axis, you have time.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Most people are desperately trying to build a spike, like a very high, very thin line on that graph.
Right.
But genuine satisfaction is actually defined by the total area under the curve. It's a literal mathematical formula. It's pleasure multiplied by time.
I mean, I love this concept because it completely flips the script. Instead of trying to create this static shock, which is a massive sudden jolt of electricity
Yeah.
that's over in a millisecond, you want to build a capacitor.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, because a large capacitor charges up slowly, it holds a massive amount of energy, and it sustains it. So, okay, let's get into the weeds here. When we talk about maximizing this area under the curves, what is actually happening in the brain?
We are basically talking about the pooling of neurochemistry over time.
Pooling.
Yeah. When you sustain a state of elevated pleasure, even if you aren't at the absolute peak, your brain is continuously releasing a specific cocktail of hormones. You have dopamine, which drives anticipation and focus. You have oxytocin, which facilitates deep emotional bonding and trust. And you have endorphins, right? Which act as natural painkillers and create the sense of euphoria.
Okay, so if you rush to the peak in, say, 5 minutes,
You get a quick splash of those chemicals, a very quick splash.
but if you stretch that out,
If you stretch that experience over 45 minutes or an hour, you are effectively bathing the brain in this neurochemical stew.
wow.
The overall volume of hormones released is exponentially larger.
Which perfectly explains an incredibly fascinating insight we found in the sources from the sex work industry. I mean, if anyone has a massive data set on sexual behavior, it's sex workers.
Oh, without a doubt. And their observations are incredibly telling.
Right. They note that clients who come in demanding a highly technical, fast-track, purely mechanical climax, like the guys who just want the spike, they rarely become repeat customers.
Yeah, they get exactly what they paid for. The peak is reached efficiently.
But they walk away feeling hollow.
Because the area under their curve was tiny. There was zero neurochemical pooling.
Contrast that with the clients who pay for, well, the illusion of romance.
Right, the slow, careful affection where the pleasure is meticulously built up over a long period.
And the craziest part of the data is that even if those specific clients don't actually reach climax during the session, they're consistently the ones who come back.
Exactly, because their overall emotional and physiological satisfaction is vastly higher. Their nervous system spent a prolonged period bathed in oxytocin and dopamine.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the total area under the curve is what dictates actual fulfillment, it completely redefines how we should think about the buildup.
It really does.
And one of the most striking takeaways here is that this buildup, the arousal, does not begin when you walk into the bedroom.
Not at all.
The starting point is rooted in what the sources call the baseline, which is dictated by entirely non-sexual everyday actions.
Because intimacy requires emotional safety and partnership. If the baseline is negative, the body is in a state of defense. It's not in a state of receptivity.
Imagine this for a second. You spend an hour doing some basic household chores, right? You're cleaning the kitchen, doing the laundry,
Okay.
and then you walk into the living room and brag about it to your partner with this smug expectation of a reward.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic mistake.
You might think you're demonstrating value, but you've actually just framed the relationship as a transaction. You've created a transactional debt,
And the brain immediately senses that conditionality.
which instantly kills the mood and drops your baseline into the negatives.
Well, yeah, because you've activated the analytical keeping score part of the brain. The sensual brain and the analytical brain operate in direct opposition.
They can't run at the same time.
Exactly. If you force your partner into a transactional mindset, you suppress their psychological readiness for connection. If you are starting the evening at -50, all of your physical efforts later on are just spent trying to crawl back to zero.
Which brings us to a massive fundamental disconnect.
Yeah.
I mean, if taking time, abandoning efficiency, and building this non-transactional baseline is the real secret to satisfaction, why do so many people ignore it?
It's a great question.
Why the rush? This ties directly into how differently men and women define what makes someone a good technician.
This disconnect is where so many relationships quietly struggle.
Yeah.
Men, generally speaking, tend to define a good technician in bed as someone with elite physical mechanics.
Right. Someone who knows exactly where to touch, exactly what rhythm to use, what pressure to apply.
It's treated almost like pushing the right buttons on a complex dashboard.
But women define a technician completely differently. The skill isn't primarily in the fingers, it's in the pacing.
Yes.
To women, a master technician is someone who possesses the emotional intelligence and the patience to build mental and emotional arousal.
Exactly. And this introduces a foundational rule of human biology, which is that physical pleasure is strictly proportional to sexual arousal.
Let me repeat that because it's so important. Physical pleasure is strictly proportional to arousal.
Right. If arousal is low, physical technique is completely useless. It does not matter how mechanically skilled you are. The nervous system simply cannot translate that friction into pleasure.
It makes me think of turning up the volume dial on a high-end stereo that hasn't been plugged into the wall yet.
That is the perfect visualization.
You can twist that volume knob all you want. You can have the most expensive, precisely engineered speakers in the world, but if the electrical current isn't flowing, you're not getting any music. You're just twisting a piece of plastic.
That really illustrates the arousal gap perfectly. Physiologically and psychologically, women's arousal generally requires a much longer runway than men's.
Because men frequently experience a rapid spike from a simple visual cue.
Right.
The current flows almost instantly.
Exactly. But women's biology typically requires a gradual layering of emotional connection, trust, and slow physical escalation to reach that exact same state of engorgement and neurochemical readiness.
And what happens if you ignore this gap? If you try to jump straight to direct stimulation of highly sensitive zones before this slow buildup is complete?
The biology is brutally clear on this. It isn't just ineffective, it is actively repelling. The body physically recoils.
But wait, let me push back on this slightly because I want to make sure we aren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
Sure.
Are physical skills entirely overrated then? Do they matter at all, or is it literally 100% just about the psychological buildup?
What's fascinating here is that we have to categorize them correctly. Physical skills are not useless,
Okay.
but they must be categorized as secondary. They are an amplifier.
Oh, I see.
Once the arousal is high, once that stereo is firmly plugged in and the current is flowing, then yes, excellent physical technique will take that baseline and amplify the pleasure exponentially.
But the critical error is trying to use the amplifier before the power is on.
Exactly. The psychological state must always precede the mechanical skill.
So, because building this arousal takes so much time and requires this delicate alignment of neurochemistry, it's incredibly fragile.
Ooh, very fragile.
It is remarkably easy to accidentally trip an invisible wire and completely ruin the baseline you spent hours building. And the sources highlight 5 specific, often totally unconscious mistakes people make that instantly kill sensitivity.
These are the hidden tripwires, And they almost all stem from a failure to understand the partner's physiological or psychological reality in that specific moment.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the first tripwire, which is purely environmental, the cold room.
Ah, yes.
This is when someone strips their partner naked while the ambient room temperature is chilly, usually because they are rushing on their own heated timeline.
This one comes down to basic vascular biology. Women, on average, have lower resting metabolic rates and less muscle mass than men, which means they get cold faster. When the human body detects a drop in core temperature, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. It immediately constricts the blood vessels in the extremities to shunt warm blood back to the vital organs to keep you alive.
So the body is literally saying, survival first, reproduction second.
Exactly.
If the blood flow is being restricted and pulled away from the extremities, physical engorgement, which is a literal prerequisite for pleasure, becomes biologically impossible. It's like trying to fall asleep while sitting in a freezing, brightly lit dentist's waiting room. The body just refuses to relax.
Precisely. You really have to adapt the environment to the biology of the person who gets cold the fastest, or you are fighting a losing battle against their autonomic nervous system.
Which flows right into the second tripwire, the unbalanced routine.
This is a big one.
This is the ingrained expectation, often learned from a lifetime of consuming media, that intimacy must follow a rigid script, usually starting with fellatio before moving directly to penetration.
The primary problem here is physiological readiness. If the focus is entirely one-sided for an extended period, the woman is expending energy without receiving the reciprocal stimulation needed to maintain her own arousal.
So she's losing the buildup.
Right. During this time, the parasympathetic nervous system, which controls the rest and digest and arousal functions, starts to dial down. The natural lubrication dries up.
And when the script finally flips to penetration, she is no longer physically prepared. The friction doesn't create pleasure. It creates microtears and pain.
And from a biological standpoint, pain is the ultimate off switch.
Right.
It instantly triggers the fight or flight response, dumping cortisol into the system and entirely erasing that area under the curve we talked about earlier.
Pain breaks the physical safety, but the third tripwire breaks emotional safety, and that's ignoring desires and assuming silence equals contentment.
This is a really common assumption, that a partner wants to be entirely passive.
Right, if you don't actively ask what they want or check in on how they are experiencing things, you are essentially reducing them to an audience member in your own performance.
It completely denies them agency. True satisfaction requires a sense of co-creation.
Yeah.
When someone is silent, we often project our own desires onto that silence. We assume they are loving it because we are loving it.
But silence is very frequently a symptom of not feeling secure enough in the dynamic to speak up.
Yeah.
Or not wanting to ruin the mood.
Exactly. If they aren't actively participating or vocalizing, the connection is broken.
And taking away that agency reaches its absolute worst form in the fourth tripwire, forcing kinks.
Yes.
This is when someone pushes a personal kink like choking, spanking, or physically forcing a partner's head movements without getting explicit prior consent.
From a neurological perspective, introducing sudden aggression or physical dominance without prior consent causes an immediate amygdala hijack.
The amygdala is the threat detection center, right?
Right. The moment you remove your partner's agency, they stop feeling like a co-creator and start feeling like an object. The amygdala detects a threat, floods the brain with adrenaline, and arousal is instantaneously replaced by a survival response.
Wow.
Consent isn't just some moral imperative. It is a strict physiological requirement for the nervous system to feel safe enough to experience pleasure.
I mean, you literally cannot experience deep pleasure while simultaneously evaluating if you are in danger.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the final tripwire, and this one is purely psychological, but incredibly common. Comparisons.
Oh, this one backfires so often.
Right. Complimenting a partner by comparing them to others. Like saying something like, your skin is so much smoother than anyone else's I've been with. Now wait, the intent there is usually to give the ultimate compliment, to say, you are the best. Does that seriously backfire?
It does, because it shatters the shared psychological bubble.
How so?
Deep intimacy requires a feeling of singularity. That in this specific moment, the outside world ceases to exist. The instant you say the words anyone else or mention an ex, you have practically invited the ghosts of your past partners into the room.
Oh, wow. You pull them entirely out of their physical body and trap them in their own head?
Exactly. They are no longer feeling the sensation. They are suddenly evaluating their own performance and aesthetics against an invisible lineup of your exes.
So the ego gets engaged, self-consciousness spikes and the flow state is destroyed.
It triggers the analytical brain again. You cannot be self-evaluating and experiencing pure sensation at the exact same time.
Okay, so assuming you navigate this minefield, you understand the math of the curve, you bridge the arousal gap, you plug the stereo in, and you avoid all 5 of these tripwires. What does genuine satisfaction actually look like?
Well, it's
Because the reality is far messier and far more primal than the curated, perfectly lit aesthetic we are sold in movies.
It is entirely uncurated. To experience maximum physical pleasure, you have to undergo what neuroscientists call transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality.
Yes, this is the temporary downregulation of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-consciousness, planning, and ego.
Okay.
Your brain literally cannot simultaneously monitor how pretty you look and fully process an intense physical sensation. It simply doesn't have the bandwidth.
This perfectly explains the phenomena of the ugly face.
Oh, absolutely.
When women are experiencing genuine, overwhelming pleasure, they don't look like models in a perfume commercial. They will scrunch their faces and close their eyes incredibly tightly.
It's an instinctive biological mechanism to block out visual data.
Because the visual cortex takes up a massive amount of the brain's processing power, right?
Exactly. By slamming your eyes shut, you are forcing the brain to shut down the visual cortex and reallocate 100% of that bandwidth to the somatosensory cortex, which processes physical feeling.
Like how you instinctively close your eyes when taking a bite of the most delicious dessert you've ever tasted.
Yes, it is absolute sensory prioritization. And this biological override manifests in the musculoskeletal system as well.
Right, you'll see involuntary muscle tension, specifically weird foot angles, where the toes will point rigidly or curl inwards.
Yeah, that's a classic sign.
This part blew my mind because it's not just a random spasm. Tensing the external limbs actually provides leverage that helps contract internal pelvic muscles, increasing the intensity of the sensation.
It's a mechanical leverage.
And this isn't some new discovery. This specific biological trick, the rigidly curled toes, is a staple in historical Edo period shunga, which is traditional Japanese erotic art from centuries ago. They understood the biology of pleasure long before we had fMRI machines.
Because human biology hasn't changed. And another telltale sign of this autonomic nervous system overdrive is heavy sweating, even while lying completely still.
Which seems counterintuitive if you aren't doing cardio.
Right, but pure arousal causes a massive spike in heart rate and core body temperature. The internal chemical cascade is so intense that the body has to cool itself down, resulting in a sweat response without the actual physical exertion of a workout.
Which perfectly explains the darkroom advantage. Why do so many people, especially women, prefer the lights off? It's not about being a prude.
Not at all.
The darkroom removes the pressure to perform for an imaginary camera.
Yeah.
It eliminates the need to look aesthetically pleasing, and just as importantly, it prevents you from being distracted by your partner's facial expressions.
It is a brilliant environmental hack to help you let go of your ego and achieve that transient hypofrontality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really shows how society's obsession with looking perfect actually directly inhibits our biological ability to feel good.
You cannot be an observer of your own experience and fully inhabit the experience at the same time. The two states are mutually exclusive.
So, to summarize the journey for you listening, satisfaction isn't a race to the finish line. It is a slow, careful build of trust and arousal that maximizes the area under the curve.
Yes.
It requires ditching those preconceived notions of technique, unlearning bad habits, and embracing the messy, unselfconscious reality of true connection.
Which really leaves us with a final, lingering question to ponder.
Let's hear it.
The sources show us definitively that our biology requires deep patience, trust, and a total shedding of our self-conscious ego to experience peak physical pleasure.
Right.
If that's the case, how might our modern lives, which are increasingly dominated by quick-fix digital communication, curated online personas, and instant gratification, be fundamentally rewiring our capacity for true, satisfying physical intimacy? Are we training ourselves out of the very patience our bodies require?
That is a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying thought to carry with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.